consider myself an entrepreneur and a writer, as well as a speaker. And I have a wife of 25 years and a daughter who's 21 years old. I live in Buckhead, and I'm heavily involved in my church, which is First Presbyterian Church of Atlanta in Midtown. Been a member there for 20-something years, twice elected elder, and currently involved in raising $40 million for a capital campaign that we're just about to wrap up. And I spend my days as an insurance broker, but my real passion is writing and speaking to groups like Purpose on Tap. 5 years ago, Clayton Edwards approached me about putting together a group called Purpose on Tap, which was envisioned as this group we have here tonight. And frankly, I thought it was kind of a crazy idea, but he ran with it, and here we are 5 years later. And you know, he's invited me to speak 4 or 5 times, and every time I've turned him down. And I turned him down, frankly, because I have such tremendous respect for the organization. And I kept telling him that, look, I'd love to speak, you know I'd love to speak, but I'm not coming unless I have a message that I think will resonate. And when I have a message I think will resonate, I'll come and visit. And so we finally got his schedule together with my desire to deliver a message I thought was appropriate for the group, and here we are. So I grew up in the Episcopalian church, with my mom dragging me to church on Sundays, kind of against my will. We had a hard and fast rule in my family that we went to church on Sunday. And so we went religiously, no pun intended, on Sundays. And then I spent a little bit of time in college taking guys to church, a lot of guys who hadn't been to church, and not every Sunday, but maybe once a month we'd go out and visit a different church. And then I had somebody visit me in my dorm room in college who asked me to accept Jesus Christ as my personal Savior. And although I had been going to church as a kid, you know, I had never made that open acceptance to another person, and so I did, and that to me was the turning point in my faith life, and when I really started to have more of a closer relationship with Jesus Christ. As men, we're raised to think that life is all butterflies and rainbows and popsicle sticks, and that, you know, life can get challenging, especially as we get older. And I think there's 2 things that make a real critical difference in our lives as we get older. One is friendships. And I think in a lot of ways we get busy and we don't give those friendships the attention they deserve. And 2 is a faith life. And I think when life gets hard, later on down the road, these guys are going to realize that the 2 things that get them through those difficult times are friendships and faith. So it's neat to be here because I feel like I was a little small part of the incubation of this idea and what's came to pass. And Clayton has invited me to speak a bunch of different times, and I candidly have turned him down every time. And he kept saying, why don't you want to speak? And I said, well, because I just have such tremendous respect for what you've built. And honestly, I don't want to come and speak unless I feel like I have something I can add. I don't want you to invite me to come speak just because I'm a friend of yours. So I turned him down, probably 4 or 5 times. And then somebody canceled for tonight, and then I just couldn't turn him down again because they didn't have anybody. So that's how I got here. So I want to tell a quick story, and then we're going to talk tonight about one of my favorite topics. We're going to talk tonight about friendship, and I think it's one of my favorite topics to write about, and it's one of my favorite topics to speak about, because I think as men sometimes we don't invest the time that we should in friendships. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. I'm going to also talk to you a little bit about a book I just read by a guy named Arthur Brooks that I highly recommend. So I want to tell you a quick story and then we'll jump in. So a young man was standing in the wings preparing to enter the sanctuary to marry his wife. His best man and father placed his hand gently on his shoulder. Son, before we open that door, I want to share some advice. Never forget your friends, he said. They'll become more important as you get older. Regardless of how much you love your family and the children you may happen to have, you'll always need friends. Remember to go out with them occasionally if possible, but keep in contact with them somehow. Inasmuch as time and nature carry out their designs and mysteries on a person, friends are the bulwarks of our life. Son, after 70 years of life, here's what I've learned. Time passes. Jobs come and go. life goes on and children grow up. The father continued, your children cease to be children and become independent, and it will break your heart. But true friends are always there, no matter how many miles away they are. When we started this adventure called life, we didn't know of the incredible joys or sorrows that were ahead. Son, be sure to love your parents, take care of your children, but at all costs, keep a good group of friends. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak to you guys. My typical audience is between the ages of like 70 and 80. And like 2/3 of the room can't hear a word I'm saying. And so this is really risky because most of you guys still have full hearing, and you're probably going to pick up a vast majority of everything I say. So it's great to be here. As you might have read in my bio that was sent out earlier in the week, I graduated from the University of Georgia in 1991. Go Dogs. Like everybody else who went to University of Georgia in the 80s, I had a solid C average. It was a high C. It was close to a B, but let's be honest, it was a C. I majored in an incredibly demanding major, home economics. I mean, it was really hard. I mean, we had to cook and measure and stuff. It was really, really challenging. And that was back in the days when you literally could fill out the application with a crayon and get in. So like the academic bar to get there wasn't that high, and then to be able to maintain that great C average was pretty demanding. So as Clay mentioned, I have a daughter, Mimi. She's 21. She's a senior at Auburn, and I just celebrated my 25th wedding anniversary with my wife. Which I like to say was 19 of the happiest years of my life. And true story, we were celebrating our anniversary in St. Bart's about 2 weeks ago, and we're having a glass of champagne at this nice restaurant, and she's doing the wife thing, she's doing the, can you believe it's been 25 years, and we're toasting, and I said, if I'd have killed you the first time it crossed my mind, I'd be out of prison by now. And luckily she laughed. And so I guess that's a message there is the secret to a great marriage is after 25 years, my wife still thinks I'm funny. And I still think she's sexy, and so maybe that'll carry us another 25 or so years. So I've also I've been a founder or board member in 11 different startups. Some of them more successful than others. I have a couple that I'll give you right now if you'd like to take them over. But they've all been a great learning experience. I've also spent 25 years as an insurance broker. But what I am really passionate about, and I came to this by way of Tommy Newberry, is about 5 years ago I started writing. I never knew I could write. I'd never tried to write. I just had a conversation with Tommy, and I said, hey, I think I'd like to write. And he said, well then, why don't you write? And I said, okay, well maybe I'll write something. So I started writing, and honestly I think like the first people that read were like Tommy and my mother and like my daughter and my wife, and of course they all were like, you're amazing, keep this up. And I've been at it now for about 5 years. Last year I had over 500,000 people visit my website. So it's been quite a journey from my mom and Tommy and my daughter and my wife to 500,000 people visiting. And they say that people teach about what they need to learn. And a lot of times I write about things I want to learn about, and I approach my writing as a conversation, much like this conversation we're having. Because I think one of the things we're really missing in the world today is open and honest conversations with each other, even if we don't agree on things. It's okay, it's still productive and progressive. Although this week I wrote an article about guns, and I found a lot of people are passionate about that subject. So I want to talk to you a little bit about this book that I just finished reading by a guy named Arthur Brooks. It's called From Strength to Strength, and it is subtitled Finding Success, Happiness, and Deep Purpose in the Second Half of Life. And so I know you guys are probably wondering at your age why a speaker would come and talk to you about finding success, purpose, and happiness in the second half of life. And the reality is that most people who find success, happiness, and purpose in the second half of life lay the groundwork for that success, happiness, and purpose in the first half of life. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what Arthur Brooks found. Brooks is the former chairman of the American Enterprise Institute. He's a conservative guy. He's also a professor at Harvard. He teaches a class on happiness at Harvard, of all things. And he's known for writing in The Atlantic a monthly piece on happiness. He's a wonderful writer. And he tells a great story in the opening of the book of how he came to write this book. And he was on an airplane, he's flying across country, landed in Los Angeles. He's in final approach, and he starts to overhear a conversation of a married couple sitting behind him, an older couple. And he hears the older man say, "I think I'd be better off dead." So as a happiness professor, his ears perk up. He starts to try to listen into the conversation. He gets a little bit of it kind of back and forth. The plane comes in for a landing. And as they're taxiing to the gate, he's racking his brain. Like, what in the world could cause this gentleman to be so lost late in life? Maybe he didn't get the education he wanted. Maybe his career didn't work out the way he intended. Maybe he just never achieved the things he intended to achieve. And so as they pull into the gate, of course, he immediately takes off his seatbelt and stands up, turns around, and looks at the guy. He wants to get a look at him. And what shocks him is he recognizes the guy. And it turns out the guy's not just recognizable, he's actually an American hero. He's an American general from one of the military services. Kind of guy you see on CNN, on MSNBC, and Fox News. When the world goes to hell in a handbasket, they pull this guy in. And he's the guy who can explain it to everybody. And so Brooks is kind of racking his brain, like, what in the world? And the general gets up, and his shoulders are slumped over, and he kind of grabs his bag and starts to shuffle down the aisle. And as he closes in on the cockpit, the captain of the plane is standing outside the cockpit door at a full salute. And the general looks up and sees him, makes eye contact with him, stands up and returns the salute. Brooks says that the man immediately stood up straight, his shoulders back, smile beamed from ear to ear on his face, and he suddenly was the man he used to be. And he floated off the airplane and into the terminal. That became the premise for this book. How can someone that wildly successful and well-known and accomplished in his life be that lost late in life? And the truth is, this is relevant to all of us. Because one of the things that we find as we get older in life is that sometimes when people get really, really successful later in life, they're really unhappy. And there's a reason for that. And that goes back to words that have been written over 200 years ago, because no one is ever rich enough, famous enough, or powerful enough. Those words were written by Arthur Schopenhauer in 1818, over 200 years ago. And I think they're still relevant today. I mean, think about Elon Musk as an example. I mean, here's a guy who's the richest guy in the world. He's worth $250 billion, and he's trying to buy Twitter. I mean, I wouldn't want Twitter if he gave it to me. I mean, why in the world he would want to go spend his money to buy Twitter? And it's because he thinks he can make money doing it. Well, here's a guy with $250 billion. He doesn't need Twitter, yet he's still chasing another deal. And that's another piece that I learned from this book, and I think it's something Tommy talks about a lot, is while success is really, really important, success in and of itself doesn't always breed happiness. And there's a good reason for that, because just as in the example of the general, as we get older in life, we tend to fade. I mean, we don't want to admit it, but I'm 54, and at 54 I'm not working as hard as I did at 44 or at 34. And when I was 34 years old, I was making cold calls to people in Seattle trying to get lunch meetings for tomorrow. And I would call people up and say, hey, it just so happens I'm going to be in Seattle tomorrow for lunch. I got a meeting in the afternoon. Can I grab you for a quick sandwich? And 9 chances out of 10, people would say, sure, I'm open tomorrow. That sounds great. And I'd hang up and get on the phone and call Delta and buy a round trip ticket to Seattle for tomorrow. And I would fly out there in the morning, and I figured out the time change, and I would be there for lunch at 12 noon. I would turn around after the lunch, go back to the airport, get an airplane and fly home. You couldn't give me $100,000 to go to Seattle tomorrow for lunch, okay? Not gonna happen. So there's a certain amount of piss and vinegar we have young when we're younger and when we're more energetic. And it reminds me of a great story. In around 2007, I just sold my first business, And my brother-in-law, who's a bond trader, shows up in my office, and he proceeds to tell me that he's got an idea for a business. And so we sit down in the conference room, and back then I used to keep scotch in my desk drawer, and we poured a couple of drinks, and we started talking, and he's drawing pictures on the board, and he's got this crazy idea for a medical device company. And we chatted, it got to be about 7 o'clock, about 4 scotches in, it all started to sound great. And I thought we were done with the conversation, except the next day he showed up again. And the next day he showed up again, and again, and again, and again. After about 2 weeks of this, I finally looked at him and I said, listen, I love you like a brother, but if you get the hell out of my office, I'm gonna kill you. And I know you wanna start this business, and you're looking for me to tell you it's okay. Here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna give you a check for $250,000, but you're never allowed to come back here again to talk about this business. Do it or don't do it. Don't come back here and talk to me about it anymore. So I gave him that check for $250,000. We started the business. About 6 years later, we sold that business for $167 million. Okay? I'm not telling you that to try to impress you, maybe a little bit, but I'm telling you that because the probability of duplicating that one transaction is 0. And I can show you a line of investments I made after that all were face plants. And the point is, you can have success in your life, but if you think you're going to continually have success, or that success always replicates itself, it simply doesn't. It's just impossible to duplicate that kind of success. So back to the book. This is one of those books you read and then you put it down and you come back to it like 20 times and you keep thinking and rethinking about things that have said. And Brooks, Art Brooks had done some amazing research on happiness. And one of the things that he learned is those that are happiest at age 65 are those that focus on faith, family, friendship, and work that serves others. Now that's not just him saying that, that's years and years of research. And the happiest people at age 80 are those that are happiest with the relationships they had at age 50. And the happiest people at age 50 are happiest with the relationships they had at age 30. And that's how it comes back to you guys here in this room, because the work you're doing today on your relationships will serve you when you're 50 and will serve you when you're 80. And he also says the biggest impediment to joy in people that are older than age 65 are material possessions. And why does he say that? Because if any of you watch network TV, you know that there's only a couple of messages that get delivered at night on network TV in the commercials. And that is that you need to buy a bigger truck, and you need to get a hotter wife, and you need more stuff. Because bigger trucks, hotter wife, and more stuff is easy to sell. Selling faith and family, friendship, and work that serves others doesn't sell Ford trucks. So what makes successful people unhappy? This is one of my favorite parts of the book. He talks about something called the striver's curse. The striver's curse. And that is, the higher we climb, the greater our expectations. And Elon Musk is the great example of that. I mean, at $250 billion, he's still trying to buy Twitter. I mean, why bother? And we get addicted to success. And I can tell you, through parts of my life when things were really raging business-wise, I did get a little caught up in sort of being the deal junkie of the next investment, the next opportunity, the next business that we might attack. And it's really not a fun way to go through life, moving deal to deal. And there's another piece from Arthur Schopenhauer, or the second part of that quote, which is, no one is ever rich enough, famous enough, or powerful enough. Wealth is like seawater. The more we drink, the thirstier we become. And the same is true of fame. And if you think about it today, there's so much time and energy spent, especially on social media, with people trying to be famous. They don't even know why they want to be famous, but they want to be famous. And the truth is, most people that are famous aren't really that happy to begin with. And the other thing about successful people is they really struggle with friendships. So if you look at people who are wildly successful, they just typically don't have very many close friends. And the reason's obvious, because they're focused on work and not on those friendships. And because their happiness is based on achievements and not on relationships. I wrote a piece a couple of months ago called "The Biggest Regrets of the Dying." Top 5 regrets of the dying, which doesn't sound like a very positive article, but it was one of the more well-received articles I wrote last year. And the number one regret of men who are dying is they really wish they'd stayed in touch with their friends. Because when you find out you're dying and you have 6 months to live, it's really tough to call your old friends and go, hey man, just found out I'm dying, I got 6 months left. Do you want to go play some golf? I mean, it's a really, really tough way to try to reconnect. And so men in particular find as they get older and when life gets shorter, they really miss those friendships at the time when they need them most. And then I came across a recent study which I thought was really fascinating about best friends. And this is a survey that was done in 1990, done again in 21. And in 1990, it said that 75% of men had a best friend. The survey was done again in 2021. Only 59% of people claim to have a best friend. It's a pretty big drop. Best friends are the people who make your life better, they make you laugh louder, they make you smile brighter, and they make you live better. So I ask you the question, if shit hit the fan in your world, who would you call at 2 a.m.? Who would take that call? Who would meet you at the Waffle House? Who would listen to you? Who would listen to you when your marriage is failing? When you get fired from your job? When your dad gets diagnosed with some kind of disease that you can't even pronounce? Who would listen to you when your children decide to move away or do something crazy? Who would listen to you when you got sued in a business transaction that wasn't your fault, you're going to lose everything you have? Who would come listen to you at 2 o'clock in the morning? If you can't answer that question, I would submit to you got some work to do on your friendships. And another thing we do as men is we tend to confuse deal friends with real friends. So in my business, I have lots of great people that call on me who are underwriters, who are lawyers, who are accountants, deal guys. That want my time. They're happy to take you to a Braves game, play golf, go eat lunch, go eat dinner. And these people will convince you they're your friends. And they're good people, but they're not your friends. Your friends are the guys you went to high school with, the guys you went to college with, the guys you served in the military, the guys who were in your wedding, the guys you can count on at 2 o'clock in the morning when you pick up the phone and you need somebody to talk to. And I can tell you, once you change jobs, those guys that were the deal friends, they're long gone. The other point I wanted to make is, I think as men, one of the failings we've made in raising men is that I think we often convince ourselves that life is just rainbows and butterflies, and it's simply not. And one of the things I've found at 54 years old is the only way you can really connect with other men is through true vulnerability, and it's the hardest thing for us to do as men. And I've found that my friendships, my deepest friendships, those I've had for 30 years, those that I didn't think could be any better friends, I've actually dramatically expanded those friendships through the simple act of vulnerability. My very best friend from college is a guy named Scott. I remember what he was wearing the day I met him at the University of Georgia. He had on a pair of cut-off duck heads and a Yamaha tennis shirt. We've been friends for 30 years. His nickname is Shit Pile. Which is another story for another day. You can only imagine. We were playing at a golf tournament last summer, and about 2 weeks before the tournament, I texted him and I said, hey man, we're gonna be together for like 3 days. I got something that's on my mind that I would just love to share it with you if we get time. And he says, great, no problem, that's great, sounds good. And so we're driving out to the golf tournament Saturday morning. We got 36 holes ahead of us. And it's about a 30-minute drive, and he says, hey, you texted me about this thing you wanted to talk to me about. What was that? And I said, honestly, it's just not the right time. Let's go have fun today. I don't want to get off on a tangent. And he goes, no. There's no time like the present. Let's talk about it. So I proceeded to tell him a story that happened to me 25 years ago that I had never shared with anybody else, that had been on my mind for 25 years. And it was a fairly long story. We pull into the parking lot, and he looks at me and he says, why'd you tell me that? Like, after all this time, why would you tell me this? And I said, because I was hoping you'd take it from me. And by the time we were done with that conversation, we're sitting in the parking lot, We're both crying in the parking lot. I mean, not like, girl tears, but like, man tears, and it's 8 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, God, I'm so sorry. I've completely brought us down. I mean, we had this great day ahead of us. He's like, oh man, he's like, I was heavy. He's like, what are we gonna do? I'm like, let's get shit-faced. So we did. But I tell you that story because I could very easily have not had that conversation with him. And yet I think that conversation was probably the most meaningful conversation we've had in 30 years. And even though it brought us down for a little bit, I think since that time we've grown closer. If you could go closer with a guy you've been best friends with for 30 years, I think it exponentially ramped up our friendship. And I've noticed now from time to time, he'll text me and say, I got something I need to share with you. And that's new in our friendship. And I think that's one of the things we don't do as guys. I think we're so afraid of being judged. And in reality, if you think about it, the happiest people in the world are those that can relax in their own weakness and stop hiding everything. And if you look at the people that are happiest in life, they're those that live more freely. And I think people that are vulnerable with their friends, steal Andy Stanley's line, they make better decisions and they live with fewer regrets. And I think that's true. And quite honestly, people that are happier just live better lives. And back to my article about regrets of the dying, I think they die a lot happier. If there's one thing we can do as men, I think we can challenge ourselves to try to be more vulnerable and to try to share more of what's on our mind, what's on our hearts, and what we need help with. So there's another study I came across a few weeks ago, and it said that middle-aged men are most likely to report that their wife is their best friend. Now, I think pop psychology would tell you, or marriage magazines or books would tell you that your wife should be your best friend. And that's great advice. They know if your wife asks you if you're her best friend, you should say yes. You know it's good for you. But I also think if your wife is your only best friend, that you've failed at something in life. Because it's great to have a wonderful marriage and it's wonderful for your wife to be your friend. But if your wife is your only friend, you've got some work to do. In another survey I read, 36% of young men are now more likely to rely on their parents for personal support than other people in their life. I mean, what a sad state of affairs when life gets hard and at middle age you're turning to your parents. And I can tell you this because my daughter does it all the time. She'll call our house at 10 o'clock at night just crying her eyes out with some issue that's happened in her world. And my wife will sit up for an hour on the phone with her, consoling her, and then my wife will stay up all night long, tossing and turning in the bed. She'll get up a couple of times, she'll send her a couple of text messages. And then about noon the next day, my wife will call her and say, hey, I'm just checking in, how are you? And she'll be like, what? What are you talking about? She's like, well, last night you were really upset. Oh, I'm done with that. We worked that out. That's what happens when you're a parent. Your kids sort of dump stuff on you and you take it from them and then they run. And it's not fair to your parents, and frankly, those conversations are much more appropriate to have with your friends. So I'm gonna wrap it up, and then we'll take some questions. But I wanna leave you with three thoughts and one question. So number one, the Arthur Schopenhauer quote, 200 years old. Nobody is ever rich enough, famous enough, or powerful enough. Wealth is like seawater. The more we drink, the thirstier we become. And the same is true of fame. I want to remind you of the American hero on the airplane and the fact that success does not breed happiness. And I want to remind you that those who are happiest at age 65, they built a life on faith, family, friendship, and work that serves others. And lastly, I want to leave you with a question. When the shit hits the fan in your world, who are you going to call at 2 a.m.? Who's going to take that call? Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions if you'd like. Anyone? Avery? What kind of weekly rhythms do I have in my friendships that allow me to keep them fresh and alive? It's a great question. So I think you heard Clayton mention I work with Tommy Newberry, and he's like a military drill sergeant on repetition. And after 5 years, I finally started listening. And I actually have a day planner. And in that day planner, every single day is listed the things I'm going to accomplish for the day. And it's things like, I mean, it's silly, but it's things like take my vitamins and drink a gallon of water, ride Peloton, personal trainer. You know, it's all the things you get to the end of the day, and if you've checked all those things off, you can go, man, this was a great, like, even if I didn't accomplish anything work-wise, like, I got a lot of shit done. And one of those things in there is, well, really three things. One is call my wife, one is call my daughter, and one is call a friend. And I can't say that I do that every day, but I also have a list. This is going to sound really neurotic. I have a list of my 12 best friends. And that list changes sometimes quarter to quarter. But when I say call a friend, it's somebody that's on that list. And what's interesting about that is again, it sounds a little neurotic, but when you do that and you sort of keep track of it, you realize that some guys you haven't talked to in a really long time. And it's not intentional, you know, it's just, you get in these rhythms where, like, you know, you'll text a friend, then you call them, and then they text you, and then you go do something together, and then you're sort of in a rhythm with that friend at the exclusion of another friend. And I found I got really bad about that. The other thing I got really bad about is I got really bad about texting friends as opposed to calling them, because it was easy and I felt like I was checking the box, and I'm really busy and like I don't have time for a phone call. And one of the things I think dramatically changed another relationship I have with another guy named Scott is I started calling him, you know, once a month, you know, once every 6 weeks, and I would simply say, hey man, how you doing? Oh, great, how are you? I'm good. What's going on? Man, I'm just calling to check in. But you'd be surprised what a game changer that is when you call somebody just to check in. Because people are like, oh, okay, well, yeah, well. I mean, it's the neatest thing, because it's like, everybody thinks you're calling for a reason. I think generationally, younger guys don't use the phone very much. And, but I think to get away from that texting and just pick up the phone and call somebody is a game changer. In the same way that writing people a handwritten note is a game changer. It's sort of all going in cycles. It's a great question. Yep. So the gist is, how do you reach out to a friend who is unreachable? Yeah. Right. And it's a hard question. There's no easy answer. I think one of the ways to look at friendships is, you know, it's a lifelong commitment, and people go through seasons in their life. I went through a really difficult season where I got into a business venture and I got sued for $5 million that I didn't have. And I went into a deep, dark hole, and no one could reach me. And fortunately, it was my faith that pulled me out of that dark hole. And as I started to pull out, I started to get phone calls from guys. And I took the most meaningful phone calls of my life, honestly. And sometimes I think you got to give people space. But I mean, when the space turns into years, then I think maybe that strategy isn't working, and maybe you revisit. I don't know that showing up on his doorstep is the best move, but I get where you're going with that. And I think if the guy checks voicemail, I think leaving him some really heartfelt voicemail messages might be the best strategy, just to let him know you're thinking about him. And you know, that anxiety and depression with men is a whole other topic I'd love to come back and talk more about. But I mean, it's a tricky thing. And you know, a lot of times we just don't want people to know what we're dealing with, and especially a guy like that that's like, you know, rock star. You know, he just doesn't want to appear weak. So, you know, it's either he's going to hit rock bottom and reach out to you, you know, or, which I hope that isn't the case, or you give him space and just let him know you're there. You know, that might be the most meaningful thing you could do, just let him know you're still here. You're not going anywhere. And you know, I think that's the difference between male friendships and female friendships, is I do think with female friendships, like, they got to go play bunco every Tuesday, right? And like with guys, like, I can go 6 months without seeing somebody, and like we can pick up with a friend after 6 months like that, and nobody's pissed at each other or, you know, pissy because, you know, you haven't called. I mean, it's better if you have, but but it's a difference between men and women is I think we can pick up on a friendship a year later and not have any hurt feelings. But I think for you to let him know you're still there and you still care about him, I think is probably the best you can do right now.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Hey Tom, so my name's Zach. You're talking all about friendships and friendships that are long lasting. In your own life, the friendships that have lasted the longest and have been the most meaningful to you, is there a common thread or something that's similar throughout those friendships that you've noticed in your own life?
Well, I think a lot of those 30-year friendships are college friendships. So what's the question is, what's sort of the common thread in the long-term friendships? And I think I got lucky, candidly. I mean, I think I met some guys in college, sort of by accident, that became friends. And I do wonder about this sometimes, honestly, Zach. I wonder, how is it that all the guys that I ended up being friends with ended up being reasonably successful guys? And because I didn't know Jack at 19 years old. It's not like I went through a filtering process and interviewed people. I just happened to become friends with guys who have all done pretty well, and which I think about that a lot. Of how did that happen? Was it just luck? But I think there are common themes. We're all married. We've all got kids. We all have a faith life. We all have decent jobs, and that, I think that's the one thing that keeps those friendships fresh is that we're going through seasons of life together. So one of my best friends from college had open heart surgery about 3 months ago. And it was the hardest thing because when you have open heart surgery, they take your phone away. And so he couldn't text. And so he went dark for 7 days. And I'm getting text messages through his wife, through 4 other people. And this is a guy you have those friends where some guys don't call very much. Then you got some guys that call you all the time. This is the guy that calls all the time. I just can't take his call every time he calls. And I love the guy to death, but I'm good Lord, you call me a lot. But he's been doing that for 30 years, so it's, but for him to go dark was pretty meaningful. That, kind of scared me a little bit that this guy's been annoying me for 30 years, now all of a sudden he's gone dark. And then he finally started texting, which was, sort of like when astronauts are coming back into the universe, and they have that period where they go dark, where they can't talk to Houston. It was that period where he went dark for a little while, and then he suddenly, popped back up on the radar screen and sent some joke about how he had a hot nurse and he was trying to take a leak into one of those plastic containers. I was okay, he's back. It's good. But I do think it's a lot about seasons of life and sort of respecting each other's seasons of life and going through those seasons together and sort of learning and growing and changing and experiencing those things together, even if you're not physically together. I think that knowing that guys are there for you is half the battle. Yeah.
You mentioned the legal situation and then, some deals going south, nose diving. Where did you go in those times? Did you reach out to friends? They reach out to you? What'd you do with your faith during that season? During those times?
Can we talk about something else? It was a really rough period. When you come and talk to groups like this, you only want to talk about, hey, look at me and look at all the great things I've done, right? That was a bad decision to get in bed with some bad people who were doing some bad things. And I figured it out about 3 months in, but I wouldn't listen to my own intuition that was saying, you got to get out of here. And I let it ride for about 9 months until the FBI showed up. The Blue Jackets will get your attention. They came in and took everything. I had left just before that, and I had the information that the FBI wanted. And so I ended up getting deposed by the FBI, the US Post Office, the IRS, and the Department of Treasury. And if you don't think your sphincter's tight, sit down in front of those 4 guys. I really thought that my life was over. And I went to a really, really dark place. And I don't want to overplay it, but it was a combination of my faith and my wife and my friends. And it was probably, equal parts. And I had a faith life at that point, but I can't say it was like, I was going to church, okay? So I was going to church, we go to church, starts at 10, ends at 10:55, we're out the door. And it was at that point it changed, and we started to connect with people in our church and started to find groups and meet people and make friends in our church. And that was a game changer. And so it was a combination of those things. But I can remember some of the conversations I had with my friends during that period, where I was physically when I was having those conversations, and how many times they put up with me calling and going, "Hey, you got a minute?" And probably telling them the same shit I told them like every day for the last week, and them sitting there listening to me and putting up with me. And I'll never forget it. And that's, back to the rainbows and butterflies. Friendships are great, but part of the reason you need those friendships is to lean on each other. And believe me, with most of my friends, like, they've made good on that. Like, they've had shit hit the fan in their world, and I've had to listen to them whine, and tell me the same thing day after day after day. But it was faith and friendships and my wife who stuck with me through that. My wife, mostly, who I can't believe didn't like shove me out a window or something, because it was just, it went on for a long time, and it was pretty painful. It's a great question. So have you ever done a Myers-Briggs test? Those ones where they wind up mapping you on the grid. I think we've probably all done one of those at one time or another. I remember doing one of those about 20 years ago. And one thing that popped up, I can't remember exactly all the acronyms in there, but one of them that popped up was, you really want to help people. Like, you should be either a policeman or a priest. Like, okay, well, I'm not quitting my job to be a policeman or a priest right now, but thank you. But it was, it stuck with me. It's been 20 years, and I walked away from that and thinking, like, somehow, some way, I want to help people. I don't know how that's going to happen. And I've done some things in my church. I've led a Sunday school class. I've led a men's group. I've led campaigns to raise money. But that stuff really didn't move me. I don't think I really scratched that itch until I started writing, and started. It's less about the writing, and it's more about the conversations I'm having with people. And so, with 500,000 people visiting my website, I get the kooks, a lot of them, which are kind of fun to read. I won't kid you. But I get a lot of people reaching out and saying, "Hey, that was really helpful. I really appreciate that. That really moved me and made me think about something differently." And that's what I'm trying to do with my writing, is have conversations. I don't have all the answers, and I'm not trying to be the opinion guy in the New York Times of, banging I'm not. I'm trying to ask you questions, and I'm trying to have a conversation with my writing in a way that allows us to talk. And you have the opportunity when I write to talk back to me, and I respond. And there's something about that that scratches an itch for me, of connecting with people, and connecting with people on a deeper level than just topical BS. And for what it's worth, I think there's something there. I think people right now are really anxious for connection. I don't know if it's COVID or if it's Twitter or if it's just the vitriol in the world, but I really do feel like people are looking for meaningful conversations, and they're willing to commit time to those meaningful conversations. I think that's a wonderful thing, if it's real, and if I'm reading that correctly. I think people want to have substantive, meaningful conversations, and maybe some of it is that it's gotten so hard to have substantive, meaningful conversations with people because you're so afraid you're going to offend them, or they're going to offend you, or you're going to get labeled or get canceled. And I don't give a darn. So, if I write something and people don't like it, they can not read it. They can unsubscribe. It's free, so I don't really care. But I find that there's just great thirst for deep conversations right now, like I've never seen. It's a great question. All right, I think it's 9 o'clock, so it's time for everybody to go home. Thank you.